Behzad, thank you ever so much for joining us on today's episode of Targeted Talks Leaders in Oncology. I'm pleased I've managed to lock you down after I've had to reschedule twice, which we won't go into that. But thank you for taking the time out today to speak. Let's go right from the start then, Behzad. I kind of want to dive into you kind of early in your career. I know that you've obviously moved Germany, Belgium, you've worked in the US as well. Why did you want to get into the industry? If I was to take you back from you as a young man, was it always your ambition to become a doctor and go into the industry?
Becoming a doctor, yes.
Mhm.
So I'm of those folks, I don't know, as a small child, I don't ask me why, someone to be. And when we're small, I see it with my own kids, they want to be certain things, and I always wanted to be a doctor. Actually, since my since I think I was 6, 7 years old.
Wow.
I checked on that when I became a little bit older. It's like, is that really what I want? And in German med school, you have to do like internships and have to see how the work is in the hospital. And I was, I think, maybe 18, somewhere around that age. And that really, really confirmed it for me to do medicine. And for some, I don't know, strange way how my brain synapses have been connected. Don't ask me. I always wanted to do cancer. Probably seeing how poor the outcome is for these patients, having been treating these patients myself, then later on, that was something which I always was extremely interested of, oncology overall. And as this young man, let's say, get older, let's put it that way, and I got more and more interested. I think I had a couple of things I realized, throughout my career. One is I really want to help patients, the individual patient, but then seeing the bigger picture, maybe that. And I was extremely interested in science, so which I think by nowadays definition we call what a physician scientist is.
Yeah.
And that's just happened very organically, actually. There was not a switch of a single day today. All right, today I'm going to be this, and yesterday was that. It just was the way I was seeing how drug development is, or how actually, let's say, science and clinic work hand in hand. And the transition to industry actually happened. Can I always describe my life a little bit as I like to play Lego. I don't know, this little stones,
Yeah,
my kids, right?
yeah.
And I always describe it as these are little Lego pieces of what I wanted to be. And for me, it was really understanding what does it actually take to develop a drug, to get a new drug. Because what I found actually really amazing, if you think about it, in oncology, it's one of the fastest, and there are other therapeutic areas now, right? But oncology is a field where 6 months later down the line, you can have a different regimen, which can become the standard of care versus where you were 6 months ago. And this almost like rapid development, which is for me, is like a trademark of oncology, right? Really amazed me. And, as you alluded to a little bit yourself, right? I did postdocs in the US, in Belgium, worked in the clinic and different hospitals in Germany. And then at some point for me, it was really, how does actually drug development work in the pharmaceutical setting? Because we have, as physicians, I think in the hospital, certain understandings, but it's a whole new world when you actually move in the pharmaceutical industry. And I had that discussion several years ago with some of my own direct reports who moved from academia to the industry, and they said, well, I feel like I'm doing a second fellowship, because I'm literally, like, I have my clinical expertise, but it's actually uncompared to what you have to learn and have to go through when you're in the industry, right? We are extremely, for a very good reason, tightly regulated industry, right? We live in the boundaries of FDA and EMA and all the other regulatory agencies, and we cannot just do what we want, which is very important. But it's also very important to appreciate that when you've moved from a physician's point of view, right, where you hold the accountability to the industry. For me, this happened, I think, almost 9 years ago, and I have to say, it was so far it's been a very, very interesting and rewarding experience.
So you definitely smashed the industry setting, and looking forward to diving into some of your roles as we move forward with this talk. So you obviously always want to become a doctor, done that. Excellent. And then was it curiosity that decided that you were going to get into industry? And the reason kind of why I asked that question is one of the previous talks that I had with a gentleman called Mick Grant. He actually got headhunted for a job in industry and just decided to kind of go with it and fell into it. But he didn't really know what he was getting himself into, which has been a great success for him. So was it your own curiosity in terms of getting drugs approved that then decided to get into industry, or did you just go, the patients need better drugs, medicines, or what kind of caused that transition?
So it was a bit of a competition. Life is about these coincidences. So I can tell you my coincidence. So I was writing. I was back from my postdoc from the US. I was writing grants. I was junior group leader in Germany in Aachen. And for 2 years, I was writing grants. Got, as often is, the first grants always get rejected, but then I continued, I didn't give up. And then the first grant got accepted, the second grant got accepted. I won the Ernst Young Award in 2015. And I was in a comfortable situation to build out my own lab and then continue my clinical services. The interesting thing was around actually 2016, sorry, before I moved to industry. I wrote a huge grant for which was small heat shock proteins, actually. And I went to the German Research Foundation, DFG, and let's say in a point of naivety of myself, wrote this like huge grants. I wanted, I think, 1.5 million or so from them. Mm-hmm. But I sat down collaboration with crystallography, with a professor of crystallography to build, antibodies to, identify the right heat shock, like the whole thing, right? And they invited me even, so I passed the first round, invited me to a panel interview, and I was telling them literally what I wanted to do. Like I wanted to literally discover the entire therapeutic class of small heat shock proteins, right, to build anti-therapeutics. Now, the way I was seeing it was from the point of view of an academic, right? Zero clue about drug development, pharmaceutical setting. So I was standing in front of the panel of Germany's who is who of all the directors, very bright people. And I know who it is, so I'm not going to disclose the name. And the guy came, he's a very well-known professor. And he said, I don't know where you're getting your ideas from, but with 1.5 million to develop a whole class of anti-therapeutics is almost naive. He slammed me hard on that. So I got a really hard reality check. But what I realized from that, it was the best thing you could have done, because what I realized, okay, science from your point of view, the PhD, you have there, but you don't know enough how drug development works, right? And one thing about me really is, which maybe a benefit about the course at the same time, is really I really want to understand things the right way. I take my time and I don't like high level. For those who have worked with me over the years know that quite well. And I was actually approached by recruiters. So it really happened somewhat it was very, again, natural, organic, that I realized if you really want to dive into drug development, you're not at the right place, because you can only go so far, right? And I was telling this to a very experienced and seasoned recruiter who was sitting in the UK. So I was getting approached through LinkedIn. And I told him literally my story and said, I really want to understand, how do phase 1 trials work? How does phase 2 trials work? How does that really work? And I'm happy to take literally the bottom of the food chain job to learn this from the ground up. And I think he said, look, I see you, like I see you have already accomplished a lot for the time and for your age. Definitely more you need to learn. And he took my CV, and long story short, I ended up interviewing with two companies. One of them was a German pharma company. The other one was J&J.
Yeah.
And I got job offers from both, and I decided to go with J&J, which is by personal reasons. I went with J&J, and I haven't regretted it ever since. So for me, it was really natural, right? And I learned really what I wanted to learn. Like I learned to set up phase 1 trial, to lead phase 1 trials, right? Protocol. Like the entire thing you really need to learn, which is the technical content of how do we run clinical trials? How do we declare new molecular entities? How do we design a phase 1 study? How do you file an IND or CTA and have these regulatory? That is actually a very important piece. If you ask me for advice, you really need to, everyone can be a drug developer, but it's the day-to-day work and the technical expertise which defines how good you become actually.
Hands-on element.
Yes.
Excellent. So then J&J, and you're obviously there for a little while. How did you find that transition from a physician, with patients, kind of face to face with patients, and then designing clinical trials?
So I had, it's interesting when you connect with people through interviews, and then people are like, a lot of people said, I never looked back. Did I miss it? Yes and no. But the thing is, the moment you're in the pharmaceutical industry and you're surrounded by really brilliant people, and J&J has a lot of brilliant minds there, right? You start to see that your world is not just the hospital you work with. Your world is much, much bigger. You're interacting with world leading, my first trial was in multiple myeloma, the bispecifics, which later on got approved, like BCMA. And you're literally talking to all these KOLs, what we call them in the field of multiple myeloma. And it's a very accelerated growth of if you're open to it, of your mindset and how you see the world. So you're starting to realize that you're impacting patients in a very positive way. And it's just not the few, but the patients at the hospital you work, but worldwide. Everything is much, much bigger, right? And much, much more accelerated. But it also accelerates your growth because you have to realize, there's this cultural component, right? The cultural component from academia, German academia in particular, can be has a certain style, and then you're going to a global setting, right? Pharmaceutical corporate code of conduct. How do Spanish KOLs work? How do Americans work? Belgium, French, and so on. So I think this transition comes in 2 to 3 ways. One is the technical part where you have to grow, but it's much, much more your leadership you have to grow, right? And you have to learn to adapt that to that setting. And for me, to be honest with you, that's something you don't, it's not like you switch it on again, you switch it off. That's a continuous growth for me, at least throughout my entire career. That when I look how I was 8.5 years ago, or 9 years ago, where I am today, it's two very different people.
It sounds like you pushed yourself out of your comfort zone to grow, and I'm a big believer of you have to get out of what's your comfort zone in order to then grow. You talk about expanding your mind, and it kind of sounds exactly what you've done.
Yes. And I continue to do so. So for me, the fun fact is, at some point, it's not so much about your technical expertise. It really is not that much. It becomes, it's the logarithmic curve, right? You grow so much, you're so quick, and then it's much more about the nuances, right, and the details, and then that's much more about how are you as a leader, right? And that leader can have different. The one is the title, right? CMO, product. That doesn't really matter. But how are you influencing the people around you? And, many, many years ago, and I did connect about what is the right CMO? What is an ideal chief medical officer, for instance, right? And very often, it's about leadership. And what is leadership? It's a very, generic term. And then you have to really define it very concretely. And now I can tell I have a very clear definition what a real leader has to be in my humble point of view. But it takes a lot of time to invest. So if you ask me for advice, I would say invest as much as time into your technical expertise as you're investing also into yourself.
There's actually a question I want to dive into is about you as a leader, because you've progressed up through the classical clinical development ranks, medical director, executive medical director. You worked for Gilead, obviously, or Kite Gilead company, and then you moved into T-Knife, your first CMO job. And I'm sure there'll be a number of physicians listening to this episode thinking, that's the journey that I want to take. I want to become a CMO. What is it like? What's the day to day? What's the differences? So The question I want to ask you is how was that transition from a big company with lots of resources? I'd imagine lots of resources
Yeah.
to a smaller company. And I think I said it on a previous episode. I'm biased. I only work really with small companies, and I love how small companies operate and the lack of you don't have red tape, and you can make decisions quicker, and you can have a real big. So I love small companies. So I am biased. So sorry to any of the guys who are listening from big pharma companies, but how did you find that transition and using that to inspire physicians who want to take that career journey like that you did?
So let me again, this is my personal journey, right? I would say to everyone, don't take just someone else's journey, really make your own. So it shouldn't sound cheesy, but really think about your personal journey, right? I've had these discussions a lot over the years. My personal journey is, and journeys on papers always look very like successful, but life is not like that, right? It's just not like. So be very thoughtful. Where are you today? Where do you actually want to go? What do you want to do in the next couple of years? Don't think about titles. I had a very 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 wise medical writer. She was the first medical writer at J&J, who gave me a very meaningful advice, which I carry still until today. She said, people who work hard will always have work for them. So don't chase, a title or promotion, but really let your work speak for yourself. And it actually is really, really true. It's really, really true. But let me answer your question, Sammy. The world of so first of all, that transition, I would always recommend to someone, don't rush. Really, do not rush. Right.
Advice.
You need critical experience. I hear this very often, like people are 1, 2 years in the industry, and like, oh, I want to have a more strategic role. What is for you a strategic role? I mean, you need to understand the basics. You need to have run a clinical trial, not just writing a protocol. That's much, much more to that. You have, my hiring manager, I'm not going to call him out, he knows who he is, who brought me into the industry. Brilliant man, really a mentor, and I cherish until today. And he said to me 8.5 years ago, you need to have started the trial, you need to have continued and done the trial, you have to have completed the trial, and you need to have done a filing. And actually, there is a lot of wisdom in that, right? And if you have done this, what I always describe, go always one layer more detailed, not just write the protocol, write all these supporting documents, then understand and work with clinical operations. Like you can go so deep, and the deeper you go, the more you really understand what is really for me a closed circle, how drug development works, right? Do a filing, answer the RTQs, launch a product, work with market access, work with real-world evidence, work with commercial. Once you went through all these nitty-gritty details, then you will appreciate the world of a chief medical officer very, very different than you would have done only parts of that. And the journey, I would say, to answer your question, we in big pharma are in a privileged position often. On the one hand, we have a lot of resources, and actually, I don't know if big pharma has so many resources. It sounds always on paper like that, but I think the reality is a bit, let's say, less. You also in big pharma have to justify your project, your clinical trial. I think you have seen, like everyone else, the news how big pharma is being hit, by layoffs over and over now, which is a sentiment of, that big pharma has to be much more cash constrained. To a certain degree, that's always the case with biotech, even more now than it used to be a couple of years ago, right? Before the crashes started. What is different definitely is you're part of an executive team. Depending on the level of seniority you come into biotech, actually, the titles change, but the conversations don't change so much, actually. If you're a product head or a vice president, whatever, your interaction maybe is with your senior leadership to get alignment for your asset. What then changes is with your board of directors. But the conversation of to be able to defend and explain why you're doing this trial, why you're using this trial design, what's your strategy of that? How is the successful TPP going to look like? A successful clinical development plan going to look like? That's pretty much the same, right? So that transition can happen very naturally, depending on when you come. If you come way too early, then that transition can be much harsher, let's say, right? That would be my advice. Like, learn your lessons you need to learn, and also remember, I'm on a privileged position you are in big pharma, and then it's easier for you to that then transition to a smaller biotech. The one thing I would say one needs to be thoughtful about biotech, in particular even the current time, is you need to be conscious that in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, you can be out of a job, right? It's just the reality because the cash. But I would say it's also a false safety in big pharma because technically can happen in big pharma the same way.
In this climate, nobody's safe from redundancy. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter if you're big pharma or small biotech or even CRO. Unfortunately, everyone is going through that. You mentioned being quite conscious of going into biotech, and there are so many amazing biotechs out there in hematology, oncology, amazing science that are looking or open to hiring a CMO. And I know that there are a lot of people in my network who get approached by CMO gigs by recruiters or directly. I think it's really important for someone moving into biotech to really understand what they're getting themselves into and make sure they pick the right company with the right team. How would what advice would you give someone who's perhaps like a VP at a big pharma who's looking into joining a biotech about making sure they make the right choice with the right companies? What indicators would you look for yourself if you were going to move into a biotech company?
It's a great question. I think honestly it depends what you're looking for, and that's a very personal, very, very personal question, right? Do you want to go into a very early bio? So it really depends, like what is your profile, right? Are you an early development person who says, I actually don't care so much about late stage? Is it someone probably which is more was like me, was done the entire life cycle first of a drug and said, all right, now I want to go literally smaller and develop an asset from the ground up at a certain phase. So there's not a right answer I can give you. All I can say is, first of all, I would say go with your gut.
Yeah.
We have our gut for a good reason, not the gut, but your gut feeling. The second is try to do as much due diligence as you can. I mean, assess biotech the way you would do due diligence, for an asset if you would ever see and be doing a BD, right, for your company, right? Does this company have the right funding? Or are they cash restricted situation that they may literally don't have a future for you for the next 12 months, but not even just you, but your clinical program. Where are they in the development? Are they very preclinical? Are they at the stage of phase 1? Are you coming very, very late to a biotech, which is a late stage biotech, already has phase 2? What I would always say also, be conscious of the executive team because these are the people you're going to interact with on a daily basis, right? Mm-hmm. Do you really feel that you can work with them, right? Is that a good cultural fit? The thing which is really, really important and is can you work together or not? This is the reality. And as we are humans, there's 7-8 billion people in the world. It's not one size. You cannot be fitting for everyone, and neither can everyone be fitting for you. You have to accept that, right? Yeah. And that's not about you or them. It's just about, are you guys compatible or not? So it's a combination of asset, it's a combination of leadership style, culture in the company. Where are you and what do you want to get out of the next 2 to 3 years? So a really great advice I got once from a venture partner a couple of years ago when I was exploring that is that, usually when we're looking for CMOs, we're looking around 80% of confidence in what their capabilities are, around 20 to 30% a stretch. If the role becomes too much of a stretch for the person, for the candidate, it's an issue because the candidates are really, what we call swimming. They're swimming too much. It makes it difficult for them. It makes it difficult for the executive team. And that's how I would be looking at it. And again, don't get carried away by a title just because it's a C-suite title, right? Think about the content, what you can bring to the company. And be also transparent. I mean, me, I'm a very direct communicator, very transparent, because I do believe long term it's better to be transparent than trying to pretend to be something or someone you just aren't, right? It doesn't help your cause long term. And that's probably the advice I would give. Like, so do your due diligence, right? And think about what is important. For some, honestly, it's the monetary aspect. For them, it's the monetary. For others, it's the content. I can't judge that, right? I'm just saying that's the homework you need to do.
Mm-hmm. excellent advice, and we'll definitely be taking that as some key takeaways. You mentioned obviously previously as well, you've hired people for your teams, and for me, I feel that getting the right team chemistry is super important for getting drugs approved, because you spend more time with your work colleagues than you do your own family in some instances. So having a good team collaboration, good team chemistry is just so important. What do you look for, Behzad, when you're hiring for your teams, or when you hired for T9 or in any future roles? What would be the big things for you?
So let me, and it's a very fair question. And again, I'm just very, very transparent. I don't care so much about people's CVs, to be really honest with you, because what I realized over the years, you can write a million fancy things on your CV. So that is
AI now, Behzad, to write it for you if you want.
Yeah, well, yeah, there you go. So what I really want to understand is a person's journey. I really want to understand. Sometimes there are really so many red flags in CVs where I filter them out, right? It's things like someone says, I've been 2 years in a company and I have done 3 approvals. Everyone who has drug knows that that's not real. Like, you can have been part of an approval, but it's very unusual for you literally, and that's even your first job. Like, you came into the industry, worked 2 years in a company, and all of a sudden you have 3 drugs approved, or have done 50 trials, right? So there is something off, right? And that's an exaggeration on the CV. And we all know that CVs to a certain degree are inflated. The question is just how much do you inflate? So for those CVs or those candidates, let's say, I do then end up interviewing. I sometimes actually take the time in interviews to really explore the person. But sometimes in the end, I tell them, I don't think that's the right thing what you're trying to do. So it becomes more of a coaching than it becomes an interview. And sometimes they actually do appreciate it, because give them time to reflect. But the way I actually do interview, to be more concrete on to your question, is I want to understand the technical expertise first, to a certain extent, and I can become actually very technical myself. Like, I can really ask the person specific questions, and that gives me a good indicator if they've really done the work what they're claiming to have done. And that is because I feel like I'm in a privileged position, because I've spent so much time in really all facets of clinical development that I can deep dive. But that's actually less part of the interview for me. Much more the interview is a very basic question where I look at someone's CV and I think I get somewhat of a good sense where they are. That I ask them, where is it where you want to go? Like, what do you want to do in 2 to 3 years? Because I have appreciated that, if you're someone's hiring manager, it's a privilege. This is not like this is not a dictatorship. This is not you're hiring someone and can tell them what to do. You have to appreciate this, that you are co-developing, that someone gives you the trust to work for you for 1, 2, 3, 5, how many years, right? So you need to think about, where is this person today? Where does that person need to want to develop into? And how can you both benefit from it, right? You want to get something out of that person. At the same time, the person is trusting you as a manager and wants to give you. So it's a two-sided street, right? But to have the best candidates, it's really also that you understand the candidate. And this is what literally my interview with people is, where I'm saying, this is where you are today. I ask the person literally, where do you want to go? Like, what are you hoping to get out of this appointment, like working with me or whoever for your next step, right? And this is very individual, right? Everyone have different interests. At the same time, I literally provide them this. If you come here, this is what you can learn, right? And what I also say to them very transparently, that I'm going to push them, not because I'm a pusher, although some may say I am, but it's because I want them to grow. I really want people to grow. I want them, that they excel. But that's also what you said about, you can only excel if you want it yourself. If you don't want to be pushed, if you don't want to excel in your role, then I can't do that. This is the one thing. Line managers are not babysitters. Line managers can only support, but the person, as you said, you asked me this, right? Because you pushed yourself. You can only help someone if they have the intrinsic motivation to improve in that role.
I talk about intrinsic motivation a lot when hiring recruiters, actually, because you have to be motivated in life. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. As a line manager, you can't do the job for them. They've got to want to get up and, smash the day themselves. You can't put that upon them. It sounds like there's a mix there from kind of attitude, experience. You're diving deeply into the kind of work that they've done. So there's some interesting points. And you mentioned leadership, Behzad. You come across as a very honest, transparent leader, which I think is the best way to be. What would you say are your 3 key points to be a successful leader?
For me, it's really about integrity. I would say integrity is the most important, and being genuine. I always say we are in a world where we are physicians. We have a highest level of responsibility, right? And that's sometimes tough because you have to try to help and support everyone, right? Everyone has different interests, for rightfully so. There's no right or wrong here. It's really about different people have different interests. The commercial person who wants to market a product. The venture capitalist has their own financial interests. The CEO, the CBO, the CSO, whoever. You as a CMO, and someone said that actually to me once, it's like the CMOs have the most difficult jobs, honestly, in the world. So don't think it's just the greatest job, but it comes with a lot of burden at the same time because you have the clinical responsibility over a small, medium, or large company. So a lot of falls on you. As things go wrong, it's your fault. Things go well, someone else may take that credit. But you have to be comfortable with that. You have to be comfortable that if there is a storm around you, that you have to stay calm. That's the really important piece, right? And at the same time, you may be faced with tough decisions, really tough decisions, but you have to think about, do I bend or do I not bend? And that really comes down to your integrity. And the way I honestly describe, and that's for me, again, it's very personal, that I would say I've never compromised on integrity and neither will. So integrity is one. Leadership for me is also inspiring. And, I have heard this very often. The leader has to inspire. But it's interesting once you actually do it, that you realize what it really means. And for me, what it means is, look, people look up to you. Like they are listening to you. They want from you advice. At one point in your career, you are no longer a receiver of information, you become a sender of information, right? And the moment you become a sender of information, actually, that is actually irrespective of a CMO, in my opinion. You have to instill trust and you have to lead people and you have to help them. They have their day-to-day challenges. And we all know of challenging clinical trials, clinical strategic decisions. Teams have worked, for months on a product, and all of a sudden, the corporate governance says, we're going to X the entire program, right? How do you then retain the motivation in your team was, put their blood, sweat, and tears for 6-9 months into this asset, and then all of a sudden someone says, sorry guys, that's it, that's not commercially viable or whatever, and then you have to exit. And I think that really makes it. Are you going to get frustrated by it? That when your team is coming to you and you're going to share their frustration, or will you be a leader and try to help them through that difficult time, right? That for me is actually what a leader really is about. And the third is help the team also from a technical point of view. So, and that comes to the point of don't rush to be a CMO. And again, there are different CMOs, by the way. That's just not one size fits it all. There are more the technical CMOs who really know it. There are more who are just more high level. Everyone, there are right roles for everyone. But I do think that if you're really very content heavy and content savvy, that you can support a particularly younger team, right? You can, you're hiring, someone from ClinOps, someone from regulatory, someone from ClinDev, that you become the middle anchor and you're helping all of them. It's not that you don't need to act as a know-it-all. That's not the point. But they have actually they're validly seeking advice. And that for me is an important piece of a successful CMO, that the person can sit down and discuss things properly through with the team, that the team feels like, this guy really or girl knows what they're really talking about. But again, depending on, don't rush into that role, take your time to learn it the proper way.
Amazing.
I think it was free, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so integrity, inspiring, and kind of the technical and content that you're providing. It's a shame that your third one didn't begin with an I as well, Behzad, because I could have had Behzad's three I's of leadership would have been had a nice ring.
Next year, realize it.
No,
I leave it up to you. I leave it up to you to rephrase it with the word with I.
My last piece, my last question, just going back to you again in terms of your career. And again, a lot of people in my network, a lot of CMOs are talking to me about becoming a consultant. And I'm seeing in the market, due to the lack of funding, there's certainly more interim appointments, or companies being more open to having interim CMOs or interim physicians, which I think is great because I think there's so much value that you can have by bringing on board an interim physician. A question I get asked a lot is does the role change becoming an interim because you're coming in to do a job? Whereas some people kind of feel that when you're a headcount, you're more involved in decision making because you're part of the company. Whereas an interim, you're coming in providing a service. Is that the case? You kind of put shunned to one side, becoming a consultant, or are you still very much the driving force, the connector of all these different kind of cross-functional teams?
I would say, A, you need to ask my clients how they feel about it. And B, actually depends on you. It depends on the person who asked the question. So there's no one size fits all. So when I did this transition, what I said to myself, for me, this is let's say a technical framework, full-time versus part-time versus temporary versus consultancy based, But me as a person will not change. That means I will provide the same service irrespective of, if I'm working for someone 1 day a week, 2 day a week. So don't confuse the one thing with the other, right? Don't mix the, let's say, operational or call it monetary time piece with how you give advice, right? And it really depends on the person. So the way I always, when I work with my clients, or even when I was approached and we had the initial discussion, I said, for me, actually, I'm going to work with you as I'm I'm for two companies right now, chief medical officer on a, part-time basis. That will never change. So the depth, what I think you're referring to, of involvement is the same. What I do personally not appreciate and I do not do is, coming in and you're giving just high level advice. I don't think you're not helping people because someone at the end of the day, again, coming to where my journey is, right? You need to be technically involved. You need to get your hands dirty. You need to write the documents, right? The people are coming to you for an actual real advice. And the real advice is more than just a quick couple words written. It sometimes goes, for some of my clients, it goes so deep that I go literally do a lot of the heavy lifting on a clinical trial, right? Which is absolutely fine. This is what we were trained for, right? We were trained not just to give high level strategic advice, but just also go again, a level deeper with the involvement. So it really depends on the person. For me, I would really say it's the same job, to be honest. It's just not, and that actually I do agree with you. Just to close that loop, I do see also that companies are less and less in the position, maybe at the position, but also the need to say, I need right away a chief medical officer 5 days a week. I'm also good to have that person 1 or 2, 3 days, depending on the stage of the development of the biotech company.
Yeah, no, okay, excellent. And another question I get asked frequently is, are you ever nervous, kind of looking over your shoulder in terms of finding new gigs, new interim gigs, because sometimes they can be 12 months, 6 months, and so they're obviously not guaranteed like a full-time headcount job is. So, do you ever get nervous, kind of looking over your shoulder, thinking, "Oh, I need something lined up in 3-6 months' time because this role's finishing"?
Yes. Yes, and I think you have to be honest about it. I think if someone who says, I'm gonna have always a job lined up, I think it's not very honest. I think this comes with the job, and you have to be, in a certain way, it relaxes you at the same time. Sounds maybe weird, but at the same, because you could, most consultancy agreements are usually 30-day period, most of the time, right? So within a month, the client can terminate you for whatever reason. Could be that maybe maybe even has nothing to do with you, asset closes or funding or whatever. When you say you did an amazing job, but we don't need it anymore. Maybe we're shifting from, what is the new hype from oncology into autoimmune. So we need a different type of person. So of course, that makes everyone nervous if you are without an income in 4 weeks' time. So does me. But I can't do anything about it. All I can do is, as I always also teach it even to my own kids, you have to put one feet after the other and work every day to your best abilities and qualities. And hope that within your network there is another recruiter like you or a company or word to mouth, you get approached. So I would say at some point doing consultancy is maybe not a bad idea, because you learn actually how, in a certain way, also how unstable the job market is. So if it hits you, you are more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But you need to have a level of comfort.
I also think that when you become a consultant, you kind of, like you say, typically most consultants have that full life cycle of clinical development or are really specific in a certain area.
Yeah.
And you would have spent a fair amount of time in the industry. So in theory, you might have some good connections already, which you can lean on to keep that trajectory moving forward when it comes to new jobs. So no, it's good advice. Well, Behzad, thank you ever so much for taking the time. Even though I've got a barrel of questions that I've got lined up that I wanted to ask you, but I have to ask them another time, unfortunately. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and being a guest on the show. It's great to have you. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to the end product.
Yeah, thank you for everyone who's tuned in as well, listening to our fourth episode now. It's excellent to see, and hopefully so many more people tuning in to Targeted Talks, Leaders in Oncology. Stay tuned. We'll have our fifth episode out in a few weeks' time. So make sure you drop us a follow and stay tuned to the next one.